This week on Political Capital, we'll look at the state of the U.S. economy in an exclusive interview with Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. The debate on financial reform continues on Capitol Hill. We'll ask Bloomberg's Lizzie and Hans Nichols what a final bill might look like. Plus, a power shift in the UK. We talk to Robert Hutton in London about Britain's new bosses. And Margaret Carlson and Kevin Hassett get the last word.
From Bloomberg Television, the business of politics and the politics of money. This is Political Capital.
Secretary Geithner joins us now for this edition of Political Capital. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Secretary. Let me start off with the Senate Financial Regulatory Bill. As it now stands, would it meet your goal of preventing a recurrence of the 2008 financial meltdown?
Absolutely. This is a very strong bill, strongest set of reforms we've seen the U.S. consider since the Great Depression. And I think it meets that test of making sure we fix what was broken, fix what has caused this crisis, but more important than that we leave the system much stronger against any risk of future crises. It's a very strong bill, and I think we're very close now. It's time to get this done. We want to bring it to earth now so that we can get on to other challenges and make sure that we're doing as much as we can to make sure this recovery is strengthening going forward.
One of the few provisions that still has to be resolved is Senator Blanche Lincoln's proposal to force big banks to divest their derivatives trading staff. You've expressed reservations about this. How could it be modified so it would meet your objections or your problems?
Well, you know, Chairman Dodd and Chairman Lincoln are working very closely together to make sure we preserve a very strong set of protections on derivatives markets and work through the concerns a lot of people have about that specific provision. And I'm very confident they're going to work that out. It's important to recognize that what this bill does, to the great credit of Chairman Lincoln and Chairman Dodd, is it brings comprehensive oversight over these derivatives markets. It's a $600 trillion market. It was at the heart of the crisis, and they're going to bring it out of the dark, under the lights.
So more transparency, but how do you modify what Senator Lincoln has proposed, which a lot of people, including Paul Volcker and Ben Bernanke, said goes too far?
Yeah, well, I'm going to leave that to Chairman Dodd and Lincoln to work out.
But you think it will be modified?
I do think it will be. I'm very confident they'll work out a appropriate solution that preserves the key thing, which is we bring these markets out of the dark, make them safer, more stable, better protection for investors.
One other thing on the financial bill, the Senate rejected a proposal by Senator McCain to crack down on Fannie and Freddie taxpayer losses. It's cost taxpayers $145 billion already, maybe 2 or 3-fold that much. However good the bill is, aren't you really ducking that issue?
No, we're going to, as soon as we get this bill passed, we're going to move very quickly to start to build the consensus on a set of reforms to Fannie and Freddie and the broader housing finance market. We started this process in the administration 6 months ago. We've been working very carefully, looking at all range of options.
Will it require legislation?
It will require legislation.
Can you get it done this year, you think?
I don't know we can get it done this year, but we're going to move as quickly as we can. And I very much welcome the fact you're hearing Republicans and Democrats point out how important this is. And I think we're going to have to bring fundamental changes. And we're going to, again, we're deep into the process already looking at alternatives. And we've been reaching out to people on both sides of the aisle, and we're going to intensify that process once we get this first stage done.
Will the Greek and European debt crisis slow U.S. growth and hurt financial markets?
I don't think it will, but let me step back for a sec. The Europeans took this enormously important step on Monday. You saw it on Sunday night, Monday. They've laid out a very strong program of reforms, help countries make sure they're reducing their deficits where they need to do that, making sure that those economies are going to be growing in the future with a very important financial backstop to those efforts. They have the capacity to make that program work. I think they're committed to do it. I'm very confident they have the ability to do that. And if they handle that well, then we have a very good chance of seeing the world economy continue to show these very promising signs of growth.
But the euro has dropped about 3% since they announced that package. Do you agree with Paul Volcker that there's a risk that the euro could disintegrate?
I don't. Again, I think Europe has the capacity to manage through this. I think they've committed to fix this problem. And again, I think they have the ability to do that, and I think they will.
So you and Volcker don't agree on that?
Paul Volcker and I agree on almost everything.
Except euro disintegration. Some Republicans, as you know, say the Europeans ought to solve their own problem, and they're going to offer a proposal that would require you to vote against any IMF loan to European countries. Reasonable?
Absolutely not. You know, the IMF, we have 60 years of experience with the IMF helping countries manage through financial challenges. The U.S. has never lost a penny. And it's been enormously important to our economic interests in making sure the world economy, our trading partners are growing, managing through those problems. We're much stronger as a country because of what the IMF has been able to do in the past. And again, we have a big stake in helping Europe manage through these things, and we're going to do it in a way that's sensible for the American economy, the American taxpayer.
You are pretty confident that both the Europeans are going to work their way out of it, and any effects on America will be de minimis.
Look, I think it's very natural that people want to see what Europe does, how they act on this very important program, and they're going to act, and by acting, they'll have the chance to earn people's confidence over time. They have the ability to manage through this. What's important, I think, to point out is that our economy is getting stronger. We're coming out of this more quickly and stronger than many people expected, ahead of many parts of the world. We're seeing a lot of strength, improvement, and confidence, and of course we're going to keep working to make sure that we can sustain that. But I think we can take a lot of comfort and encouragement from the signs of strength we're seeing here in the United States.
Mr. Secretary, your bags are almost packed. You're going to China next week. In April, you delayed the currency report to give them 3 more months. Are you convinced now that China feels an obligation to its own consumers and businesses in the global community, and they're going to act and not let this drag on?
China's going to do what's in their interest as a country. And as I've said many times before, I think it is in China's interest they move to let their exchange rate start to gradually reflect market forces again. I'm confident they're going to do that. But what's at stake for the United States is very important. We want to make sure that we're working to expand opportunities for American exporters around the world, in China too, that U.S. firms face a level playing field when they compete with countries around the world. That's going to be the center of our agenda in China, as it should be. And again, one of the important things you can see in the recovery you're seeing in the United States is that as we start to grow again, a lot of that growth is coming from exports growing, from manufacturing getting stronger, industrial production stronger. Those are very encouraging signs.
Let me come back to domestic issues. It's a week after the so-called flash crash. We're still not sure what the cause is. That causes some people to say that just shows once again markets are rigged against the little guy.
I spent a lot of time with Chairman Mary Shapiro and Chairman Gary Gensler of the SEC and the CFTC these last several days. As you said, they're going to put out a report on Monday laying out their initial findings. I think you're going to see them move initially on some initial suggestions that could be very important, but they're going to take a very long view, broad view across the market structure, the structure of our securities markets now, again, to make sure we have a set of arrangements in place that protect the small guy, protect investors, make sure that people who trade in those markets, as millions and millions do every day, are confident that it's a fair and more stable system.
Mr. Secretary, you had a good employment report last month, 231,000 additional private sector jobs, but the unemployment rate went up to 9.9% as more people are looking. Isn't it inevitable now that you're going to have a jobless rate 6 months from now of somewhere from the mid-9s to the high 9s?
I don't think that's inevitable. Again, the key thing, I think this is going to be very important to confidence. What we're trying to do, what we need to do is to make sure we're creating more opportunity for Americans, more confidence from Americans that they're going to have a job with growing wages over time, more confidence in that important part of their
economy. So it could be under 9.5.
Well, again, I think the key test is going to be how fast are we creating new jobs.
Okay. Secretary Geithner, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Political Capital. We just heard about the prospects of financial reform from Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. Let's bring in Bloomberg reporters Lizzie O'Leary and Hans Nichols to break down the bill for us. Lizzie, the Secretary seemed pretty optimistic. Will the Senate pass a financial reform bill next week, and how soon will it become law?
Maybe next week. There are a lot of amendments that are getting a little bit out of control. Chris Dodd was trying to tamp that process down. This is not necessarily the bill that Dodd and the White House set out to pass. It's veering around a little bit on the floor. It will become law, but they've been a little optimistic in their calendar.
Let me ask you about a specific, the controversial issue of derivatives. After Blanche Lincoln's Arkansas primary next Tuesday,
yes, they're not voting on it till then.
Are they going to sell out her provision on the Senate floor?
They're either going to sell it out on the floor or in conference.
Right.
They know that she's vulnerable. They know that she wants to appear tough on banks. But this provision, which would require banks spin off their swaps desk, is coming under heavy assault from Sheila Bair, from Ben Bernanke, from Paul Volcker, from Republicans. This one's a little out of control, and it's going to go away in some form.
You just mentioned Paul Volcker. Tell us about the role he's playing in this whole process.
Yeah, it's like we keep writing Paul Volcker off, and then he outfoxes everybody. So he very smartly came out against Blanche Lincoln's derivatives proposal, but sort of in this way that said, well, let's get rid of this, but in doing so, you must pass the Volcker rule. Yeah. Hey, look at that, the thing named after him. So it's been very interesting to watch him kind of dodge, and he has a lot of respect, commands a lot of respect on the Hill.
Hans, does the White House think passing this bill is going to be a political winner for him in this very tough year?
Oh, I think that's very clear from the White House. The longer this debate stays in public, the White House likes the optics of it. They like the dynamic of it. I mean, the president was up in New York, raised a little money. The only thing they'll lose on this is some big dollar donors from the bankers. But aside from that, this is a political slam dunk for them, and they will talk about it from now until November.
Speaking of bankers, you and your more glittering partner, Juliana Goldman, had a piece this week that the White House has a new favorite banker.
Well, Brian Moynihan of Bank of America is bringing apples to the teacher's desk pretty much every morning. You know, the White House almost thinks of this as behavior modification. You have a bunch of unruly students. Right. Some are in the back row acting up. Some maybe like Jamie Dimon, who was once the golden boy. And instead of punishing the unruly ones, they're saying, gee, look at this kid in the front row, Brian Moynihan. Isn't he behaving well? And the phrase you hear from independently from a bunch of senior administration officials is rolls his sleeves up. They do genuinely like him, but there's also a part of saying, look, this is what happens when you cooperate. We like you.
Yeah. Jamie Dimon used to be on Rahm Emanuel's speed dial. I suspect Brian Moynihan is now.
Well, and yeah, Moynihan's close with not just, with a lot of people in the administration.
Afghanistan this week, all smiles with Karzai and Obama. Hasn't been the case. Was it just a front or real?
Well, it's a front where they acknowledge tensions, so you can expect future fights down the line. But at the same time, the president, in the lead up to this, was very clear that he was unhappy with some of his senior aides, namely Jim Jones. And in that press conference in the East Room, where he had the entire war cabinet up, one person was absent. Who was it? Jim Jones. But look, Obama will not
be... Was he unhappy with Jim Jones because of policy problems or because of the way they were handling Karzai?
The way they were handling Karzai. Jones made some comments that some in the White House thought were indiscreet on the flight over to Kabul. When Karzai heard about them, he went apoplectic. That's when he flirted with the Taliban, starts talking to Iran more. So the idea is let Karzai know that we all like him.
Of course, to be fair, the president gave Karzai the back of his hand, too, several months ago. He wasn't exactly praising him.
As they manage the Karzai relationship, there's an acknowledgement that Karzai is the only one they can really deal with.
Right.
So well, there is unhappiness there. There's no doubt about that, but they can't really express it.
Immigration, climate change. Has Obama decided which one's his priority? Can he get either?
I don't think he can get immigration, and I think there's an acknowledgement at the White House that he's not going to get immigration, namely because Lindsey Graham has made it crystal clear that he's not going to provide any sort of cover on that, and they need bipartisan support. Climate change, I think, does happen after regulatory reform. The White House makes an effort on it. I don't know if they get it. They see the oil spill as adding urgency and momentum to a potential bill.
Do you agree with that as far as Capitol Hill's concerned, Liz?
I do on climate change over immigration. I mean, Graham, I had a conversation with him where he just basically threw up his hands and said, forget it.
Yeah.
But I also think on the oil spill front, yes, the White House sees this as momentum, but there are these, like, moderate senators, like, from oil districts, Mary Landrieu, and I don't know what they're going to do about that yet.
Let me go to Elena Kagan. Safe, conventional choice, Hans, right?
Yeah, and we don't know a whole lot about her, at least in the public record. In Democratic circles, people have a pretty good idea of where she is, just kind of on a tonal level, because she worked in the policy shop for the Clinton administration. So while there isn't a clear paper trail, I think the White House is pretty comfortable with where she might rule and how she might go.
Yeah. Lizzie, let's turn to her prospects on Capitol Hill. What are the primary issues or hurdles that Elena Kagan faces in this confirmation battle?
Well, the one is what you heard Hans say, is the not much of a paper trail, and the people who like to say, look, this is someone who's very careful. I think someone used the word careerist. That aside, there are a couple of issues where she'll get questions. The military recruiting at Harvard, but she basically got a pass from Scott Brown on that, so that helps her.
The question whether she would let military recruiters at Harvard when she was law school dean. By the way, she was appointed Harvard Law School dean by Larry Summers, the first woman Harvard Law School dean. Anyway, I digress.
Not for her math skills.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So that's one issue, but she's essentially gotten this public pass from Scott Brown, so that's important when you're trying to rack up the votes. The other questions, some questions about executive power, she'll get those. But look, this dance, we know. We know nominees give careful answers. They say stare decisis, settled law.
Right.
We kind of know how this is going to play out, and we're starting to know the math, too.
It's a kabuki dance, and we know that she's going to get almost every Democrat. She's going to get probably a handful of Republicans. and she'll win with 62 to 65 votes. Is that far off?
I think that's not far off at all. We're watching Arlen Specter, who, you know, is interesting to watch for a number of reasons, but who is walking back his comments about voting no for her as Solicitor General. And that may be for political reasons, but that's going to help Kagan potentially in the long run.
Maybe the most inexplicable vote imaginable is to vote against someone for Solicitor General and then a year later vote for him for a lifetime job on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But that would accuse Arlen of doing something inexplicable, and I would not want to do that. Okay, Hans and Lizzie, thanks for being with us, and we'll be back with a last word right after this break. Welcome back. In a moment, we'll talk to Margaret Carlson and Kevin Hassett about primary concerns plaguing incumbents here in the U.S. But first, a power shift in the United Kingdom. Bloomberg's Rob Hutton joins us now from London. Robert, Britain has a new government. Can the Cameron-Clegg marriage of convenience survive?
Well, they keep saying they think it'll last for 5 years, which is how long they've agreed a deal for, and that's actually the maximum length of a British Parliament. Other people, David Blanchflower, writing this morning, said he thought it would make it to the end of the year and he'd be surprised if it made it beyond that. I think the big test is going to be when they come to this central promise that Cameron has made Clegg, which is a referendum on changing the voting system. Now, Cameron opposes changing the voting system because it works fairly well for him.
Will they then campaign on opposite sides on that? Will the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister?
They will, yes.
That'll make for an interesting contrast.
The Deputy Prime Minister will be arguing for a yes vote, and the Prime Minister will be arguing for a no vote.
Robert,
there is a precedent in Britain. In the mid-70s, the Labour government split on Europe and decided to have an in or out referendum on whether Britain should be a part of the European Economic Community, as it then was. And different members of the Cabinet campaigned on different sides. So it can be done.
They also have some differences on some domestic issues, on taxes. The Tories want more tax cuts. On immigration, the Liberal Democrats are more pro-immigration. Any sense of how those are going to be resolved?
Well, they've spent about 4 days before this deal was announced hammering these out, and so we've got a document that sets out the basis of the agreement. And on immigration, well, the Liberal Democrats lost on that. On other issues, they've won a rise in capital gains tax to bring it much closer to or identical to income tax. So actually, they seem to have hammered most of this stuff out, and to some extent, actually, it's been quite good for David Cameron because he's been able to jettison a lot of the policy that he had put in place 4 years ago and was actually quite uncomfortable with, but couldn't quite see how to get rid of.
Let me ask you this. Labour, 13 years of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Is there a natural heir, and will the party move to the left?
Nobody knows. There is no natural heir. The favourite is David Miliband, a former aide of Tony Blair's, but Ed Balls, a former aide of Gordon Brown's, is also probably in the running. He hasn't declared yet. Ed Miliband, David Miliband's brother, is also likely to declare at some point soon. So, but there is no obvious successor in the way that there was both when Gordon Brown took over and when Tony Blair took over.
Okay, Robert, it'll still be exciting times politically in Great Britain. Thank you. Let me turn to you two now. It looks like a bad year for incumbents around the globe. Margaret, is this going to threaten Republicans too, or is this primarily a Democratic concern in the U.S.?
No, it seems to be an equal opportunity destroyer. You have Chris now running as an independent in Florida. Bob Bennett, if there were a Mount Rushmore for conservative Republicans, he would be etched on it.
And it's going to continue to be the case,
and it's going to continue to be the case. You have races like Senator John McCain's in Arizona, in which he's certainly running as if he's in danger.
We'll come to McCain in a minute, but Kevin, let me ask you your generic thoughts on whether it's going to be a problem more for the Democrats.
Well, I think absolutely it's going to be a bigger problem for the Democrats, but it is a problem for all incumbents, and it's going to especially be a problem for those Republicans that worked with the Democrats to help Obama achieve this big statist agenda. I think that all those glorious crowds that we saw when Obama was running for president, we're now seeing the opposite, the angry mobs. And those angry mobs are going after even people like Bob Bennett because they're viewed to be too close to the political insiders that are making us a big statist, almost socialist state.
You were an advisor to John McCain in 2008. Are those angry mobs going after him now?
Well, right now, the angry mobs are not going after him. If you look at the polls, he's kind of doing okay in the average polls. I think part of that is that he's got a lot of affection. There are a lot of people that respect his war hero status and so on. And part of it is that J.D. Hayworth, the person who's running against him in the primaries, is a pretty weak candidate.
Former congressman.
Yeah, that's right. He's a pretty weak candidate. And so I don't think McCain is in trouble.
But he's running as if he is. He's in the witness protection program for politicians. He now says he wasn't a maverick. He named one of his books had a subtitle of Maverick. He does everything he can to get on to the other side of issues like immigration, in which he was a co-sponsor with Senator Kennedy of the immigration reform bill. He talked this week in a very bad ad that I think will go down in history about that, quote, danged fence. My great-grandfather might talk about a danged anything.
Let me ask you both. There's two big elections coming up this Tuesday. Arlen Specter, incumbent in Pennsylvania, is struggling. Blanche Lincoln, a Democrat in Arkansas, is struggling. Will both or either survive, Kevin?
I don't think either one of them is going to survive.
Both lose,
I think that voters are just furious with both of them. I mean, they're furious with Obama and the Democrats, right. But even going back to Bush and the TARP. And so there's a lot of anger towards Washington, and those two are basically going to retire.
Well, Obama has a 69% favorability rating, but Specter looks, having switched parties, like a double incumbent in a year when you should be an incumbent of no party.
And how about Blanche Lincoln?
Oh, I think in a lot of trouble. And she's got the primary from Halter from the left, and I don't think she makes it.
Doesn't get 50%. She's in real trouble. Okay, we're not in real trouble when we have you two. Thank you very much. And thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
Political Capital is a production of Bloomberg Television.